Beloved, hear me by the authority of the living God. This is not a season of delay, and this is not an hour of defeat. The Spirit of the Lord is declaring today that the tide has turned. What stood against you has been moved by the hand of God, and what resisted you has lost its power. Heaven has already spoken, and the verdict is settled. God has shifted everything in your favor. Many have prayed while watching. The walls remain unmoved. But I tell you, faith is never silent in heaven. When God moves, He does not explain Himself. He transforms situations suddenly. One moment you are surrounded, and the next moment the enemy is scattered. That is how God works. He does not slowly negotiate victory, He commands it. Do not measure this moment by what your eyes can see. Faith does not consult circumstances. It enforces divine truth. The same God who parted seas, shut lions' mouths, and raised the dead is working on your behalf right now. What looked like opposition was only positioning. What felt like delay was divine alignment. God has been arranging things beyond your sight, and now the shift has come. I declare to you today, favor is speaking where accusation once ruled. Doors are opening that no man can shut. Strength is rising where weakness once lived. This is not emotional excitement, this is spiritual reality. When God shifts things, He does it completely, decisively, and in your favor. God has already moved behind the scenes on your behalf, and this truth must settle deeply in your spirit before it ever shows itself in your circumstances. Too many believers wait to see movement before they believe, but faith was never designed to follow evidence. Faith moves first because God moves first. Long before you realized there was resistance, heaven had already issued a response. While you were praying with limited understanding, God was answering with unlimited authority. Nothing about your life has caught Him by surprise, and nothing standing against you is outside His control. You must understand that God does not react the way men react. He does not rush, He does not panic, and He does not delay out of uncertainty. When God acts behind the scenes, He does it with precision and purpose. What you call silence is often God working where your eyes cannot reach. The greatest works of God are not noisy, they are decisive. The foundation of your breakthrough was laid before the pressure intensified. The solution was released before the problem fully revealed itself. There are moments when it feels as though nothing is changing, yet in the unseen realm, everything is being rearranged. Angels move at the command of God, doors shift, hearts are influenced, systems are altered, and resistance is weakened without announcement. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are not fighting alone. God is not asking you to figure it out. He is asking you to trust that He has already handled it. Faith must learn to rest in what God has done, not strain for what it hopes He will do. When you pray, you are not convincing God to move, you are aligning yourself with what He has already decreed. The enemy thrives on delay in your thinking, making you believe that nothing is happening when in fact everything is happening. If you could see what God has already set in motion, you would stop begging and start declaring, behind the scenes, God corrects what you could never confront. He goes into places your voice cannot reach and touches people you have never met. He opens opportunities you did not apply for and shuts doors that would have destroyed you. He allows certain delays not to punish you, but to protect you. What feels like denial is often divine preservation. What looks like a closed door is sometimes God removing a trap. You were never meant to carry the full weight of the outcome. That responsibility belongs to God. Your part is faith, obedience, and expectation. Anxiety is often a sign that we are trying to do God's work, instead of trusting Him to finish what He started. When God works behind the scenes, He is building a testimony that cannot be denied, only witnessed. Many breakthroughs fail to manifest because people quit believing too early. They stop speaking faith because nothing has changed on the surface. But God does not build from the outside in, He builds from the inside out. Roots always grow before fruit appears. Foundations are always laid before structures rise. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean progress has stopped. There are decisions being influenced right now that will benefit you. There are conversations happening that will work in your favor. There are alignments forming that will make sense only after they manifest. God is never late, but he is often hidden. He hides his work so that when it appears, no man can. Take the credit. What is coming will not be explainable by human effort alone. This is why faith must stay alive in the waiting. Faith does not demand a timeline, it trusts a person. The character of God is the guarantee of the promise. If he said it, he has already backed it with action. Your job is not to manage the outcome, but to guard your confession. Speak as one who knows that heaven has already moved. Even now things are shifting quietly. Resistance is weakening. Pressure is lifting. What was locked is loosening. What was delayed is being released in order. You are closer than you think, not because of your striving, but because God never stops working once he begins. And when he moves behind the scenes, he prepares the way so thoroughly that when the moment comes, it unfolds suddenly, decisively, and with undeniable power. And those who doubt it will look and wonder how it happened so quickly, when in truth it was being arranged all along, layer by layer, step by step, by the unseen hand of God, who finishes what he starts. What opposed you has lost its authority, and this must be understood not as emotional encouragement, but as spiritual fact. Opposition only exists where permission is granted, and when God withdraws permission, resistance collapses even if it still makes noise. The enemy may still speak, circumstances may still appear threatening, but authority has already shifted. What once stood tall against you is now operating without legal right, without power, without heaven's backing. Authority does not depend on volume or visibility. The loudest opposition is often the weakest. When God removes authority, he does not always remove appearance immediately. Goliath still stood in the valley when David ran toward him, but his authority had already been judged. The outcome was settled before the stone ever left the sling. In the same way, what has been confronting you may still look intimidating, but it is already defeated in the realm that matters most. You must learn the difference between pressure and power. Pressure can exist without power, but power cannot be resisted by pressure. The enemy relies on intimidation, repetition, and delay to convince you that he still holds control. Yet control is not determined by persistence, it is determined by authority, and authority always flows from God. Once God declares an end to resistance, nothing can legally stand. Many believers lose ground because they continue to treat defeated opposition as if it still has permission to rule. They negotiate with fear, tolerate doubt, and submit to circumstances that have already been stripped of authority. Faith is not passive acceptance, faith is recognition of what God has already ruled. When authority shifts, faith must respond by standing firm, not retreating. What opposed you may have worked for a season, but seasons end when God speaks. Pharaoh resisted until God said enough. The Red Sea stood in the way until God commanded it to move. The grave held Lazarus until Jesus called his name. Authority always answers to God, and once God intervenes, opposition becomes temporary at best and irrelevant at worst. You are not required to defeat what God has already disarmed. The cross did not weaken the enemy, it stripped him. The resurrection did not challenge authority, it established it. When Christ rose, every force of darkness lost its claim. That victory was not symbolic, it was legal. And what Christ won, believers are called to enforce through faith, not effort. Opposition feeds on your agreement. Fear gives it language. Doubt gives it time. Silence gives it space. But when you speak in alignment with God, opposition loses its platform. Authority responds to words that agree with heaven. This is why confession matters, not because words are magical, but because words reveal alignment. When you speak what God has said, you stand where authority flows. Behind every prolonged struggle is often a misunderstanding of authority. You pray for relief when you should be declaring truth. You ask God to move when He is asking you to stand. Authority is exercised, not requested. Once God has spoken, the responsibility shifts to faith to enforce what has been declared. The enemy understands authority better than many believers. That is why he flees confidence and targets hesitation. He knows he cannot stop God, but he can distract people from realizing that the battle has already been decided. He thrives where believers forget who they are and what Christ has accomplished. What opposed you was allowed only for a time, and that time has expired. Its resistance now operates on borrowed ground. It has no future, no permanence, no divine endorsement. The moment God withdrew His allowance, opposition became movement without momentum, noise without substance, threat without power. You are not breaking through resistance. You are walking into freedom that has already been secured. You are not forcing victory. You are stepping into alignment. When authority shifts, the atmosphere changes, and what once held you back begins to move out of the way, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, but always surely. This is why you must refuse to think like someone still under siege. Faith does not ask whether opposition is real, it asks whether it is authorized. And when God removes authority, faith responds with confidence, boldness, and expectation. You do not shrink back from something that has already been judged. You do not fear what has lost its right to rule. Even now, what opposed you is weakening, unraveling, losing influence. The grip is loosening. The pressure is lifting. The voice is fading. Not because these circumstances suddenly became kind, but because authority has already shifted, and what no longer has authority cannot hold its position, cannot maintain control, cannot stop what God has determined, cannot reverse what heaven has settled, cannot stand forever against a word that has already been released, and cannot survive once faith rises and begins to act in agreement with the victory that was secured before the resistance ever appeared. This shift was ordained, not accidental, and understanding this changes the way you interpret every part of your journey. Nothing about what is happening now is random, delayed, or improvised. God does not stumble into solutions, and He does not adjust plans under pressure. What you are experiencing is the unfolding of something that was settled long before the struggle became visible. The timing, the alignment, and the change you are sensing are not reactions to circumstances, but manifestations of divine intention. Ordination speaks of authority, purpose, and appointment. When something is ordained by God, it carries heaven's backing regardless of earthly resistance. Long before you prayed about this situation, God had already marked the outcome. Long before opposition rose, God had already appointed resolution. What appears sudden to you has been in preparation for longer than you realize, forming quietly, steadily, under the direction of a God who sees the end from the beginning. Accidents produce confusion, but ordination produces clarity, even if that clarity comes later. You may not have understood why certain doors closed, why relationships shifted, or why paths you expected to work suddenly failed, but ordination often requires separation before manifestation. God removes what cannot go where He is taking you. What felt like loss was often alignment. What looked like disruption was actually protection. When God ordains a shift, He weaves it through obedience, delay, correction, and endurance. Every step matters, even the ones that felt unnecessary at the time. Joseph did not end up in authority by chance. Every unjust accusation, every forgotten promise, every silent year was part of a divine sequence. The shift that elevated him was not luck. It was the unveiling of something God had already planned. You must stop blaming yourself for delays that were never your fault. Not every waiting season is caused by disobedience or lack of faith. Some delays exist because God is synchronizing multiple elements at once. He is aligning people, timing, resources, and conditions so that when the shift happens, it cannot be undone. What God ordains, He secures. Ordination also means permanence. Accidental blessings can fade, but ordained shifts endure. When God moves something into place, it is not fragile. It does not depend on constant maintenance from you. It stands because God stands behind it. This is why the enemy fought you so hard before the shift manifested. Resistance often increases right before an ordained change becomes visible, because darkness recognizes what is about to be revealed. Faith grows stronger when you realize that God was never unsure. Heaven did not debate your future. God did not weigh options. He spoke, and what he spoke began moving toward fulfillment. Even your prayers were part of the process, not to inform God, but to align you with what he had already determined. Prayer does not change God's mind. It positions the believer to receive what has been decided. What you are stepping into is not something you forced or manipulated. You did not talk God into blessing you. This shift is happening because it was written, authorized, and timed. The hand of God is evident not only in what is changing, but in what did not destroy you. You survived things that should have. Taken you out, not because you were strong, but because you were preserved for an appointed moment. There are patterns in your story that only make sense when viewed through ordination. The recurring challenges, the repeated lessons, the delayed breakthroughs, all point to a process rather than a problem. God was shaping capacity before releasing increase. He was developing character before granting access. What you are receiving now requires the preparation you endured then. When something is ordained, it does not need to be rushed. God is never late to what he has appointed. He arrives exactly when conditions are ripe for maximum impact and lasting fruit. The pressure you felt was not a sign of failure, but proximity. The closer you came to the shift, the more intense the resistance became, because ordination attracts opposition before it reveals outcome. This understanding removes fear from the future. You are not walking into uncertainty, you are walking into something God already approved. You are not guessing your next step, you are following a path that has been marked. The same God who ordained the shift will sustain it, defend it, and cause it to produce what he intended. Even now, the evidence of ordination is becoming visible. Things are falling into place with unusual precision. What once required effort is beginning to flow. What used to resist is now cooperating, not because circumstances suddenly became favorable, but because the appointed time has arrived, the authorization has been activated, the sequence has reached its moment of unveiling, and what was always meant to be is now emerging into view exactly as God intended from the very beginning. Favor is replacing struggle and resistance, and this is not a motivational phrase but a spiritual transition that changes how life responds to you. Favor is not about ease without purpose. It is about divvy, nay, assistance that removes unnecessary friction. Where you once had to push, strive, and explain yourself, God now begins to work ahead of you. What required exhausting effort before starts to respond with unexpected cooperation, not because you became more persuasive, but because heaven is now involved at a deeper level. Struggle often teaches endurance, but it is never meant to be permanent. There are seasons when God allows resistance to build strength and discernment, yet there comes a moment when he shifts the way outcomes are achieved. Favor does not cancel responsibility, but it changes the atmosphere in which responsibility operates. You still walk, but the road is smoother. You still speak, but hearts are more open. You still act, but results come with greater certainty. Many believers misunderstand favor, thinking it removes opposition entirely. In reality, favor changes the balance of power. Resistance may still exist, but it no longer controls direction. What once delayed you now accelerates you. What once drained you now sharpens you. Favor means God is influencing outcomes beyond what your effort alone could produce. There are moments when you look back and realize how much energy you spent just trying to survive. You fought battles that were never meant to last forever. Favor arrives when God decides that the lesson has been learned and the season has ended. It is a signal that you are no longer being trained in the same way. God does not keep his people in the same test once the purpose of that test has been fulfilled. When favor replaces struggle, you begin to notice doors opening without manipulation. Conversations go differently. Opportunities appear without chasing. People offer help without being asked. This is not coincidence, it is coordination. God is arranging outcomes so that his goodness becomes visible not only to you, but to those around you. Resistance often thrives where fear and uncertainty dominate. Favor grows where faith and obedience align. When God releases favor, he also gives clarity. You know where to go, when to move, and what to say. Confusion lifts because favor carries direction with it. God does not bless randomly, he blesses intentionally. Favor also exposes the difference between effort and grace. Grace does not mean inactivity, it means empowerment. You still show up, but you are no longer carrying the weight alone. The pressure shifts from your shoulders to God's authority. What once required constant defense now requires confidence. Favor teaches you to trust that God is working even when you are not striving. This transition can feel unfamiliar, especially if you have lived in struggle for a long time. You may feel tempted to overwork, over-explain, or overthink, because resistance became normal. But favor invites rest without passivity. It teaches you to move with God rather than ahead of him. Learning to receive can be just as challenging as learning to endure. God often releases favor quietly at first. It shows up in small wins, gentle confirmations, and subtle shifts. Over time, those small changes accumulate into undeniable transformation. What once felt heavy becomes manageable. What once felt impossible begins to look attainable. Favor does not announce itself loudly, it reveals itself through consistency. When favor is present, even mistakes are redeemed. God does not remove accountability, but he softens consequences. He corrects without crushing. He redirects without condemning. This is not leniency, it is mercy at work. Favor means God is more committed to your growth than to your punishment. Resistance taught you persistence, but favor teaches you discernment. You no longer fight every battle. You recognize which doors are God-ordained and which ones are distractions. Favor sharpens wisdom because it aligns you more closely with God's perspective. You stop forcing outcomes and start following guidance. This shift also changes how others perceive you. Favor creates credibility that cannot be manufactured. People sense that God is with you, even if they cannot explain it. Your presence carries weight not because of authority you claimed, but because of authority God granted. Favor speaks before you do. You may wonder why this did not happen sooner, but favor arrives at the right time, not the easy time. God waits until your foundation can support what he is releasing. What you are receiving now requires maturity that only struggle could develop. The resistance was not wasted, it was preparation. Now, instead of pushing against closed doors, you find yourself walking through open ones. Instead of proving yourself, you are being recognized. Instead of constant warfare, you are experiencing divine assistance. Favor is not making you careless, it is making you effective. God is shifting the way progress happens in your life, replacing exhausting resistance with purposeful momentum, aligning people and circumstances in ways that remove unnecessary struggle, and allowing his hand to become visible through outcomes that once seemed beyond reach. Faith activates what God has already settled, and this truth changes prayer from pleading into agreement. God does not wait for faith to decide what he will do. He waits for faith to receive what he has already done. Before you believed, before you asked, before you understood, God had already spoken concerning your situation. Heaven is not uncertain about your outcome. The question has never been whether God is willing, but whether faith will rise to align with what has been settled. Faith is not the force that creates God's will. It is the response that unlocks it in the natural realm. What God settles in heaven requires faith to be expressed on earth. This is why Jesus often said, according to your faith, not because faith replaces God's authority, but because faith agrees with it. Agreement gives access. Alignment releases manifestation. Many people live below what God has settled because they confuse hope with faith. Hope looks forward, but faith stands present. Faith does not wait for evidence, it responds to truth. When God settles a matter, faith does not ask when, it declares now. This is why delay often feels heavier than defeat. Delay tempts you to believe that nothing has been decided, when in reality everything has been decided, and faith is required to step into it. Faith does not ignore reality, it confronts it with a higher authority. Circumstances may argue loudly, but they do not outrank God's word. When faith is activated, it does not deny difficulty, it denies difficulty the final word. What God has settled carries greater weight than what you feel, see, or fear. Faith places God's decision above human experience. There is a difference between believing that God can and knowing that God has. Faith lives in the certainty of has. It understands that the work is finished even if the result is not yet visible. This is why faith brings rest. Striving comes from uncertainty, but faith rests because it knows the outcome is secured. You stop fighting for victory and start standing from victory. Many prayers fail not because God did not answer, but because faith did not stay engaged. Faith must remain active even when nothing appears to change. The enemy's strategy is not always to stop God's work, but to exhaust your expectation. If he can convince you that nothing is happening, he can cause you to abandon what was already settled. Faith is activated through hearing and responding to God's word. Every time you speak in alignment with what God has said, you reinforce your position. Silence can weaken faith when it allows fear to speak louder. This is why confession matters. Your words either activate agreement or amplify resistance. Faith-filled words do not manipulate God. They position you. God has already made provision for what you are facing. Faith does not ask God to prepare something new. It accesses what has already been prepared. Healing, provision, direction, and favor are not being created in response to your struggle. They were established before the struggle began. Faith reaches into what is settled and pulls it into present experience. Unbelief does not cancel God's decision, but it can delay your participation in it. God remains faithful even when faith wavers, yet unbelief limits perception. You can be surrounded by provision and still live as though nothing is available. Faith opens your eyes to see what God has already placed within reach. Faith also requires patience, not passive waiting, but confident endurance. You continue to act, speak, and move in expectation, even when progress feels slow. Faith is proven not by excitement, but by consistency. It shows up again and again, refusing to retreat into doubt. Faith keeps standing where God has spoken. This is why spiritual maturity matters. Immature faith looks for signs before it moves. Mature faith moves because God has spoken. It does not require constant reassurance. It remembers past faithfulness and draws confidence from it. Every testimony you carry becomes fuel for current faith. When faith is activated, it shifts how you interpret resistance. Opposition no longer feels like denial but confirmation. If God has settled the matter, resistance is simply proof that something valuable is being enforced. Faith does not panic under pressure. It presses deeper into trust. God has already settled your future, your provision, your assignment, and your outcome. Faith is not struggling to convince God to do something new. It is aligning with what has already been declared. This alignment brings authority into your posture, confidence into your voice, and stability into your spirit. As faith continues to activate what God has settled, fear loses influence, confusion loses ground, and hesitation begins to dissolve. You start to move with assurance rather than anxiety. Decisions become clearer, steps become firmer. You no longer ask if God is with you, you move because you know He is. What remains unseen is not unfinished. What feels delayed is not denied. Faith stands in the gap between settlement and manifestation. refusing to retreat, refusing to compromise, refusing to speak against what God has already declared, continuing to agree, continuing to trust, continuing to act in alignment with heaven's decision until what was settled in the unseen becomes undeniable in the seen. Step forward boldly, because this season is working for you, not against you, and hesitation will only delay what has already been prepared. Boldness is not arrogance, it is agreement with God's direction. When God signals movement, standing still becomes disobedience. Fear often disguises itself as caution, but faith recognizes when the time to move has arrived. This is not a season to retreat into analysis or wait for perfect conditions. God rarely moves when everything looks safe. He moves when trust is required. Bold steps are taken by those who understand that God goes before them. You are not stepping into uncertainty, you are stepping into alignment. The path may not be fully visible, but the next step is clear, and clarity for the next step is all faith requires. God reveals direction progressively, not all at once, to keep dependence active. Waiting for full understanding often results in missed opportunity. Many opportunities are lost, not because they were unavailable, but because they required courage. God opens doors, but He does not push people through them. Movement activates momentum. When you step forward, resources begin to respond, support appears, and confirmation follows action. Faith is not proven by intention but by movement. This season is working for you because God has already recalibrated the environment. What once resisted now supports. What once drained now strengthens. What once confused now clarifies. But these benefits are accessed only by those who move. Standing still in a favorable season still produces stagnation. You must cooperate with what God is doing. Boldness grows as you act, not before. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is obedience in the presence of fear. Waiting to feel confident often results in perpetual delay. Confidence follows obedience. Each step strengthens faith, and faith builds momentum. God meets you in motion, not in paralysis. You may be tempted to wait for external validation, but validation often comes after commitment. God confirms direction through progress. As you move, signs align. As you speak, doors open. As you act, clarity increases. Faith does not demand proof before movement. It recognizes movement as proof of trust. This season working for you means that even challenges serve a purpose. Resistance becomes refinement. Setbacks become redirection. Mistakes become lessons rather than limitations. God wastes nothing in a season aligned with His will. You are not walking on unstable ground, you are walking on prepared ground. Stepping forward boldly also requires releasing the past. Old failures, disappointments, and labels cannot move with you into a new season. Carrying yesterday's weight will slow today's progress. God does not ask you to forget the past, but He does ask you to stop letting it define your decisions. This season demands fresh obedience, not old caution. There is urgency in this moment, not panic, but purpose. Delay now does more harm than action. God's timing is precise, and obedience must match that timing. Opportunities have windows. Favor has moments. Waiting too long can result in missed alignment. This is why boldness matters now. You are not responsible for controlling outcomes. You are responsible for taking steps. God handles results. Your obedience releases His involvement. Trying to guarantee success before acting is a subtle form of control. Trust relinquishes control and moves anyway. This season working for you also means that God has accounted for your weaknesses. He is not waiting for you to become perfect before He moves. He moves through willingness, not flawlessness. Grace fills the gaps where strength is lacking. Boldness is not about self-confidence, it is about God-confidence. As you step forward, your perspective will change. Fear shrinks in motion. Faith strengthens with use. What once seemed overwhelming becomes manageable once engaged. Momentum transforms mindset. Movement exposes exaggeration. Many fears exist only in STI. Illness. You are not behind. You are not unqualified. You are not too late. God does not call the ready. He readies the called through obedience. This season is designed to accelerate growth, expand capacity, and establish confidence through experience. Step forward boldly, because obedience unlocks what preparation made possible. This season will not wait for hesitation to resolve itself. Faith moves while fear negotiates. The ground beneath you has already been secured. The path ahead has already been influenced. What remains is your response. As you move, you will see that God is already active, already arranging, already supporting, already confirming. This season is not testing your worth, it is revealing it. Every step taken in obedience strengthens alignment and releases momentum, turning uncertainty into clarity, hesitation into confidence, and potential into reality. As you continue moving forward in faith with trust in the God who works all things together for your good.